He thinks Bush is taking advantage of 9/11 and is using it to abuse his emergency powers. Congress is hustling to beat the clock before leaving for a month-long summer break, and they want to make sure that the bill gets onto the president's desk for him to sign as soon as possible. But getting his permanent disaster fund won't be easy. Conrad is working with a tighter budget this year than he did 5 years ago when the last farm bill was passed. Shalaby is not alone in his thinking. A study conducted by MIT found that public insurance programs like S-chip provide coverage to more people than tax credit alternatives do. Reporting in Washington for Fox News, I'm Christina Paschyn. As rescue workers continue to search for the dead and missing from the bridge collapse in Minneapolis, officials here on Capitol Hill are making sure the city gets all the money it needs to rebuild the bridge.
This was a model of how to respond to an emergency. I think we all learned some lessons from Katrina. I think in many ways that was a mirror on the national leadership of this country, and this was handled differently.
Minnesota Senators Amy Klobuchar, Norm Coleman, and Congressman Jim Oberstar have introduced bills in both houses of Congress that would give Minneapolis about $250 million in highway relief funds. Typically, states can only receive up to $100 million in emergency funds from the federal government, but the bill would waive that cap. But Congress is hustling to beat the clock before leaving for a month-long summer break, and they want to make sure that the bill gets onto the president's desk for him to sign as soon as possible. Regardless, Senator Coleman says Minneapolis will come out of the crisis strong.
There will be days of horror as we go forth, because the recovery process is not a pretty process. And there will be pictures and scenes and stories that will rip at your guts. But we will go forward.
It has to. The Twin Cities are scheduled to host the Republican National Convention next year, but experts say it could take 1 to 2 years to rebuild the bridge. If that's the case, then the city's already limited public transportation systems will be overwhelmed. From Washington, Christina Paschyn, Fox News. Minnesota Congressman Keith Ellison is a popular speaker because he's the first Muslim elected to Congress. But he's under scrutiny for a recent speech he made comparing President Bush to Hitler. Ellison is accused of saying President Bush reacted the same way after September 11th as Hitler did when the German parliament burned down.
That's not true. I never did that. You should look at the public record and you will see that I did not say what you suggested that I said. It's in the public record. It's there.
Okay.
And I have no further comment about it.
He might not have meant it, but this video on YouTube shows what he told an atheist group on July 8th.
It's almost like, the Reichstag fire kind of reminds me of that. After the Reichstag was burned, they blamed the communists for it, and it put the leader of that country in a position where he could basically have authority to do whatever he wanted.
Ellison recently told newspaper columnists that he knows the Bush administration did not plan the September 11th terrorist attacks, but he thinks Bush is taking advantage of 9/11 and is using it to abuse his emergency powers. His recent misstep does not bother these Muslim women.
As a Muslim living in America, I'm very proud to have him where he is.
I think he's setting up a very positive example for how Muslims can be part of American political structure and society.
That's good news for Ellison. But the freshman congressman is not the first to find that an off-the-cuff remark to a friendly audience can become more controversial than intended. From Washington, Christina Paschyn, Fox News. About 9 million children in this country do not have health insurance, and Congress wants to change that. Both houses recently voted to expand the state children's health insurance program called S-chip, which expires in September. S-chip currently provides coverage for about 6 million children whose parents make too much money to qualify for Medicaid, but who don't make enough to pay for private insurance. Under the congressional bills, about 3 to 5 million additional children would be covered. In North Dakota, S-chip currently covers more than 6,000 children, but more than 14,000 children remain uninsured. If S-chip is expanded, it would cover about 4,700 more over the next 5 years. But even with this increase, Congressman Earl Pomeroy says North Dakota can still do a lot more.
The federal government is offering $4 for every state dollar advanced to cover uninsured children. And yet North Dakota has one of the smallest participation rates in the country because the state hasn't put much money out there. In fact, 41 states of the 50 cover their children more generously than North Dakota.
But that's not the only obstacle facing North Dakota's uninsured kids. President Bush is threatening to veto the combined bill because he says an expansion of S-chip would force more families to rely on the government for health insurance. Instead, the president wants to offer middle-income families a tax credit to help them to better afford private insurance. But Children's Defense Fund spokesperson Ed Shelaby says the president's plan isn't the solution.
Tax credits typically leave low-income families out in the cold. And they're a lot more challenging, a lot more bureaucratic, and a lot more difficult to implement.
Shelaby is not alone in his thinking. A study conducted by MIT found that public insurance programs like S-chip provide coverage to more people than tax credit alternatives do. And perhaps more importantly for Congress, they also do so at a much lower cost. From Washington, Christina Paschyn, Fox News. Candace Waters loves to sing and dance with her father. But this 6-year-old can't talk, and she still wears diapers. That's because Candace suffers from a severe form of autism, and it prevents her family from taking Candace outside of the house, even for a bite to eat.
It's her condition because of her behavioral issues. It's really hard to go out with someone like that. She'll arch her back, she'll fall to the floor, she'll scream. She won't cooperate. It could last a half hour to an hour. You don't know.
Even a simple trip for a haircut can set Candace off.
She started to have a meltdown as soon as we walked in, and the whole place just stopped and looked.
Robert Waters can't help but worry that his daughter will never be able to have any sort of a social life.
You just think that, you know, their life is over.
It doesn't have to be. While doctors don't know for sure what causes autism or if it can be cured, there are ways to treat it. And Chicago is home to several groups that help children with autism to have a life.
Parents can't keep their children locked away.
Therapist Michelle Wolke teaches autistic children how to behave properly in public, particularly at restaurants. While all children sometimes misbehave, she says autism makes it more difficult for the child to understand that he is doing something wrong.
Colin used to drop all the time, constantly drop, kick, and scream. He would come in and see the ice cream that he saw and not be able to wait. Now he knows first whatever we're eating, and then he can have ice cream.
But even after months of therapy, children can revert back to their old habits.
One of the children was on the floor screaming bloody murder. He had gone up to the counter, taken his toy, and he took it and wiped out everything on the counter.
Rafal, where are you, Rafal?
Deborah Soloveychik can relate. Her 2 sons have autism. But she says one of the biggest challenges is getting other restaurant patrons to understand the disease.
They will make all kinds of terrible comments, like, why don't you discipline your child at home? What kind of parent are you? What's wrong with that child?
We need to teach the communities, and we need to teach people out in the restaurant business as well as other places, you know, how to treat people, because we're all people and everybody deserves to have a life.
Combining with ASA.
Karen Noonan is the Director of Programming for the Northern Suburban Special Education District. The district makes sure that schools are providing autistic children with social development programs.
We have several programs where a large portion of the students' day is to practice the skills they learn in school in the community.
When taking their kids out to eat, Noonan suggests that parents be realistic about your child's behavior. Tell restaurant staff and patrons that your child has autism. She also recommends finding a mentor, a parent with an older autistic child who you can turn to for advice. Highland Park resident Terry Steinberg has a 13-year-old son living with autism. She has her own method of getting him to behave well in restaurants.
We had a lot of prescripting. Like instead of him walking into a restaurant last week and saying, you know, to the host, you're welcome to come to my bar mitzvah, you're all invited, and it's going to be at the downtown, in the downtown, to say, Billy, that's inappropriate, you don't know that person, just say, hi, there's 3 of us for dinner, please.
The Waters family is determined that Candace will one day be able to handle eating out.
We want to bring her out more. I mean, you know, they live a normal lifespan, so she's going to be around a long time. So she has to start getting used to going out.
But for now, they work patiently with her, hoping someday that Candace will be able to live a happy life. Christina Paschyn, Medill reports.